So welcome everyone. In a minute on your screens, you'll see the first slide. So today we are going to be talking about home ownership. And the question is going to be, should we buy or should we continue to rent? Why might buying be a good idea for us? And then if we think it's a good idea, how do we go about that process? So this is going to be, as it sometimes is, a two-part workshop. We'll be doing chapter 1 this week, and we'll be doing chapter 2 same time next week. So here on our second slide, today we're going to look at, is home ownership right for me? There are going to be benefits, we'll discuss those. There are going to be disadvantages, we'll discuss those. And then we're going to look at some of the typical costs in buying that first home. We're going to look at what you do first, how you go about the whole process, and how you actually find that home that you would love to be able to buy. In chapter 2 next week, we're going to be going a little bit more into the ways that you finance your home purchase. So we'll be discussing what exactly is a mortgage or a loan. Where do I get one from? What are the different kinds that are available to me? And we'll be considering all aspects of mortgages, like some mortgages have different requirements and qualifications. There are many different things that come with various mortgages. So interest rates can be different. They can be a fixed rate, a variable rate. Term of loan or length of loan can be different, can be 15 or 30 years. We'll talk about the importance of your credit score, your credit history, and other things related to that. And then we'll be telling you what are some typical lenders that will supply you with different kinds of mortgages or loans. Okay, so this week is more of the should we do it or shouldn't we do it? Next week is much more of the what is available for me to finance that loan. Okay, so let's start today on slide 3 with, is home ownership right for me? There are various benefits and disadvantages. We'll look at those. We are absolutely going to look at some of the costs involved, because considering the costs will tell you if you can afford to start looking for a home now, or whether you should be budgeting for a purchase later, maybe in a year or two, when you can better afford the kind of home that you want. So we'll be looking in detail at some of the costs. We'll be talking about the whole process of starting to look for a home, what you should do, what you should understand, what you need to look for. And we're going to start telling you about some of the options that you will have for actually financing your home. Okay, so now over to Barb, and she'll start talking about some of those benefits of home ownership.
All right, benefits of home ownership. Perhaps the most obvious one, the one that most people hear of, is this idea that the value of a home will increase over time. This is, for many people, the largest purchase, investment really, that they will make. And the wonderful thing about owning a home is, even as you're living in it, so you're using it, the value of the home frequently will increase. It's not guaranteed, but for the most part, especially over time, the value of a home will go up, which is one way that many people improve their financial condition over time. But a home offers some other benefits. It's a place where the family lives, and because you normally stay there for some amount of time, it offers stability for that family as a place to live, to be part of a community, to be part of a school system, and so forth. For many people, it offers pride of ownership. I remember when my husband and I bought our first home, I was just thrilled with the idea that I actually owned a little piece of the earth. It was a very small piece, but it still was ours. There are frequently less rules about how you use your own property if you live in a condo or if you live in an apartment building. Obviously, the landlord has rules and restrictions. There certainly are rules and restrictions on home ownership, but they're not normally as difficult. Frequently, people talk about the tax benefits of owning a home, and this has to do with the kinds of interest costs that then you can take off your tax return. And then finally, the fixed rate long-term monthly mortgage payment. The good news about paying back the money that you will probably borrow to buy a home is that frequently it is fixed rate. In other words, the rate doesn't change, and it's the same one over time. So the good news about that is that means you can plan. You don't have to wonder what's going to happen to interest rates. You don't have to wonder what you're going to owe this year, next year. It's the same number. So it really is a wonderful planning tool. And the other good news about that is because it doesn't, if it's a fixed rate long-term loan, because it doesn't increase, normally over time, your income will increase. So the price that you have to pay for the house over time is less difficult to manage as your income goes up. So those are some of the benefits of home ownership. Does anyone want to add any other benefits, perhaps that you've heard of from other people who say, you should own a home because, has anybody heard of other good benefits of owning a home? Anyone want to jump in? Maybe not? Okay. Or maybe you'll think of some as we go along. Let's move on to disadvantages, because there are some.
I was going to share that one thing I do hear a lot of is that you have the power to remodel.
Yes, you do.
As you'd like.
Yes, if you want that wall to be painted green,
You can paint it green.
you want a bigger kitchen, there are sometimes zoning requirements that you have to file. And certainly you don't want, if you really want a big change to your house, it's going to, I encourage you to get professionals to help you think that through. But yes, if you want new countertops, you can get them. And you know, that's a wonderful way of making this feel like your home. It really belongs to you. Good point, Raul. Other thoughts? Okay, disadvantages. As I mentioned, normally the value of the home will increase over time. However, there are some situations where the value of the home will not increase. It may go down. This has to do with the general value of property in the particular area or in the country. In 2008, there was a terrible problem with home ownership because the value of homes had gone up too quickly. And basically many homes were overpriced. And when we had some financial pressure, the value of those homes dropped. So especially that was hard on people who had recently bought a house. Of course, if you've bought and you've owned your home for 15 or 20 years, it's not likely that the value of the home is going to be, has gone down. But for somebody who bought a home in 2007, 2008, 2009 were very hard years because the prices of those homes dropped dramatically. And that can happen. Repairs are your responsibility. You are the landlord. If the faucet doesn't work, if the furnace goes out, it's your problem. You have to get somebody to fix it if you can't fix it yourself. There are a number of additional expenses. We've got some of them here that are associated with just buying a house. Fees, deposits, and closing costs. We're going to get into all of these in more detail in a minute, but these are costs that you have to pay when you actually are buying the house. It's part of the cost of buying the house, and it's not the price of the house itself. So that's one big cost, the price of the house. But then there are a bunch of other costs that go along with that cost. There are property taxes, house insurance, and what's called Homeowners Association fees for some people. Those are other kind of costs that come with owning a home. Those happen every year after you've bought the house. And then finally, a disadvantage to home ownership is it can be expensive if you need to move after a short period of time. Think of all of these costs that you have put into your house beside paying for this home. So you've put in a lot of money, and then if you decide to move, you're not really realizing the benefit of those extra costs for buying the home. And then you've got to turn around and do it again if you want to own another house. So you would need to think about, what are my plans longer term? Do I like this area? Do I want to be in this area? Is this a good place for me to be there for a while, for a longer term than 1 or 2 years? Because otherwise it can be quite expensive to move from one home to another. And before we move on, has anybody heard of any other problems, disadvantages to buying a house or buying a home? Anne is shaking her head. Well, then let's move on let's talk a little bit about some of these costs.
When it snows, you have to do a lot more work.
Yeah, we're going to get into that one, Raul. I've got some stories to tell. Next slide, please.
Sorry, I have a question, please.
Yes.
I don't know if it's the moment, but I want to know that if you know of any organization that support a buyer for a first time.
Yes, and we will be talking about that next week.
Okay.
We've got some examples of loans and organizations that help with first-time buyers. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Good question. Good setup for next week. Okay, let's talk about some of the costs. We're talking right now about the 2 different types of costs. The first is the fees and the cost for the home before you buy it. And then there's a whole nother set of costs, which is once you own your home. So first, we're going to talk about those fees and costs before the home is yours. The one that everybody thinks about first, of course, is the price of the home, which is the mortgage cost and the down payment. If you live in Montgomery County, we were just talking about this before this presentation started. I think the average for a home in Montgomery County is something like $400,000, $500,000. Now the low end would be maybe $150,000 or so, $1,000, and the high end is probably close to $1 million in Montgomery County. This is an expensive place to buy a home, and that is simply the price of the home. The mortgage cost and the down payment. And we're going to go into how to think about those costs and financing options in chapter 2. So what we'll talk more about today is all of those other costs. The closing costs, which are the fees you pay to buy your home, and then the monthly recurring, or whether they're monthly or maybe twice a year, those other costs that happen at least every year and maybe several times during the year, maybe even monthly. And then finally, the unexpected costs, which can be not necessarily terribly high, but sometimes are. But certainly they are difficult if you're working hard at keeping to a budget. So with that, let's turn it back over to Anne.
All right, so I'm going to talk in detail, but not too much detail, about what's called closing costs. So as Bob mentioned, the closing costs are the fees that typically you pay before or when you actually purchase the house. So that is when the house or home legally becomes yours. Okay, so in order for the seller to pass over the deed of the house to you so that it's not theirs anymore, it's yours, you do have to pay what's called closing costs. Now, there's several types of closing costs. We have not listed every single possible closing cost here. We simply listed the most common ones. So there's going to be, I think, 3 slides on these. And we've arranged them into the kinds of costs that they are. Okay, so please bear in mind, though, this is not absolutely everything. This is just the most typical ones. And we will tell you next week that sometimes you can avoid these costs. But for right now, I'm just telling you, the most likely ones that you may come across. So the first sort of category or type of closing cost is the legal and taxes. So under legal, there are usually attorney fees. The attorney will have to do a couple of different kinds of things for you. And usually there will be some fees. He'll do things like he'll make sure that the documents are in good order, that everything's all put together properly. And he may have to do some other bits and pieces of work, but usually there will be an attorney fee. Very importantly, there will be what's called a title search fee, and typically also some kind of title insurance. So the title simply means that is the way that you know that you own the property. Okay, so if I have a valid title to my property, that means I actually own the property, okay, with no problems. So these kinds of fees are really all about ensuring that the seller, the person selling the property to you, does have a proper legal entitlement to that property and it's not a scam. Okay, so we will definitely want to know that the seller has the title, and title insurance kind of goes along with that. So typically those 2 costs can run you about $1,300 altogether. Okay, so it's not a small amount, but it's usually required because it's the only way that you'll know that the property is really able to be passed from the seller to you. Then there are some other fees like recording fees. These can be called by other names. And this is typically just, again, so that the local government will have a record that the property is now yours. Then there are taxes. The transfer tax is a tax that you pay typically mostly to the state of Maryland, but also some counties charge a transfer tax also. So that's typically what you have to pay the government just when the title, again, passes from the seller to you. The good news is this is usually 0.5% of the purchase price that gets paid to the state. And that can be halved if you are a first-time Maryland home buyer. So bear in mind that can be a little bit less than normal. The bad news is if you buy in Montgomery County also charges you 1% of the purchase price. So in other counties, it's cheaper, but of course, Montgomery County is not necessarily a cheap place to live. So, so transfer tax can be quite a lot of money. You will also have to pay, as Bob mentioned, property taxes. Usually you will have to pay some of this at closing, even though it's an ongoing expense. And I'll talk again a little bit more about that in a minute. So on the next slide, we have another kind of closing costs, which is your financing closing cost. So this is all the kinds of costs that you will have related to the loan that you're taking out, and making sure that the lender will lend you the money based on your house being in good repair, and so on and so on. So to begin with, there are some fees that are essentially just making sure that the house is the kind of house that you think it is. So the appraisal fee essentially makes sure that the home seems to be worth what you are being asked to pay for it. So if the seller is saying, hey, this home is $250,000, this fee really makes sure that it is worth at least $250,000. That protects not only you, but also the lender. The survey fee is simply a fee that somebody goes out and makes sure that the boundaries of the property are where they say they are. Okay, and I just have to tell you, we actually had one instance. We nearly bought a house, and when they did the survey, they discovered that the owners were saying that the piece of land it was on was actually much bigger than it was. So it was next door to a vacant lot, and they were saying that some of that lot was theirs. The survey discovered that actually it was not, and we did not buy that house because we were not pleased to discover that. So can be important, right? Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't think, but it can be important. Typically, you'll also have to pay for a home inspection and a pest inspection. Again, this really protects you. You know, if there's a big damp problem in the house, or a dry rot problem, or other kinds of problems, you would like to find out about that before you buy the house. Okay, so those are good ideas. The mortgage company or the lender will typically charge you a small fee for a credit report. And again, we'll be talking more about this next week, but don't forget that your credit report and credit history, those are going to be important factors to some lenders. Typically, you'll have to pay mortgage insurance. Also, as we mentioned before, homeowners insurance, and possibly a homeowners association fee. So again, you know, sounds like a lot of costs, but these are all very important, and they're all very different. So on the next slide, we now come to some other things that you need to know. So generally, again, we didn't include all the closing costs here, and some of these closing costs you might not have to pay, but in general, closing costs will come from anything about 2% to 5% of the purchase price of your home. So if your home costs, let's say $100,000, your closing costs could be anything from $2,000 to $5,000, or even a little bit more than that. Okay, I mentioned before, some closing costs are actually costs that you are paying in advance. So some will be fees for things that already happened, like the attorney already did all the work and prepared all the documents. So that's a cost that has already happened, and you are simply paying it at closing. Other types of costs, though, as I mentioned, are really a deposit on costs that you are going to be due to pay in the next few months. So typically these will go into what's called an escrow account. This is an important word for you to know. Your escrow is an account held by the lender, and it contains monies that you have paid in advance. And oftentimes the lender or mortgage company does require you to pay some of these fees up front, just so that they're absolutely sure that you're going to be able to pay them. And then they pay them for you over to the person that you owe the money to. And these kinds of monies that we're talking about will typically be that mortgage insurance, your homeowner's insurance, and your property taxes. And typically the lender will ask you to pay something like 2 or 3 months of that ahead of time. So you're going to be keeping ahead with those payments. It is payments that are due, but you're going to have to know for your budget that those will need to be paid a little bit ahead of time. And this really is the lender just making sure that you do not fail to pay those 3 things, okay? Because they're very important. He doesn't want there to be a sudden fire and you haven't paid your homeowner's insurance and now the house is burnt to the ground and you owe the lender money, but there's no property, that you can say, oh, well, we still have the value of the house, because you don't anymore. So bear in mind that there will be this escrow account. It's important for you to know what that is. Now, I will also say, and we'll discuss this next week, some lenders do offer mortgages with no closing costs or with very reduced closing costs. So we will tell you how you can find those kind of lenders. But just also bear in mind that sometimes that means too that there will be a higher interest rate on your loan if you have lower or no closing costs. So bear in mind, sometimes that is a bit of a trade-off. Okay, so again, when you get the PowerPoint, you'll be able to look a bit again at these closing costs and what they are. You can certainly Google some of them and get more information. But typically, this is the kind of closing costs that most people have to pay, at least some or part of these costs. And as you'll see, you do have to include these in your budget for buying a home. All right, back to Bob.
Okay, so you've bought your home, you've settled in. Let's talk about those monthly costs that happen every month or almost every month. And here are some of the big ones that you need to be thinking about. The first is property taxes. And these taxes are paid by homeowners to the local government. So for example, in Montgomery County, to Montgomery County. The Montgomery County government. And that money, that's the money that goes for the school system, the libraries, the fire police, and so forth. That's what the local government is using that tax money for. Beyond that, there is mortgage insurance. Mortgage insurance is a cost that you pay because the lender wants you to pay it. In effect, it's protecting the lender from the possibility that you might not pay on your loan to the lender. Now, if you are able to put down a down payment of the purchase price of your home of 20%, in other words, if you are borrowing less than that 80%, then you won't have to pay, normally you don't have to pay mortgage insurance. But from the lender's perspective, they want to make sure that they are protected. So if you have a loan that has a very small or no down payment, you will have to pay the mortgage insurance in effect, on behalf of the lender's interest. And finally, there's homeowner's insurance. This is what you pay to an insurance company. This is protection for you. It's protecting the home and it's protecting the contents in your home from damage or loss. This is an important type of insurance that you're going to want to make sure is part of your budgeting for monthly costs. If we could go on to the next slide, please. Homeowner association fees. Certainly, this is not a fee that all homeowners have to pay. It's more common for people who have condos or townhomes. There are some neighborhoods that also have homeowner association fees for houses in the neighborhood. So it depends on where you're buying your home and what kind of home it is. What these fees cover is the maintenance of common areas, like cutting the grass in front of the condo building or clearing the snow, Raul, so that you don't have to, around the building. It can also cover the insurance for those common areas, some basic administration costs for just overseeing the work that's done. And sometimes it can even cover things like trash collection for certain neighborhoods. So as you're looking at different homes, you're going to want to ask if that property is part of a homeowners association, so that you know if this is going to be a fee that you're going to need to budget for. Another common and recurring cost is property upkeep and use. Now, if it's a house that you've bought, of course, there's the lawn mowing, there's the landscaping. If you want to buy some flowers, if you want some flowers around your house, you're the one who has to buy them, and you're the one who has to put them in the ground, or you can hire somebody. But keep in mind, there's both for any home, there's the exterior and, the outside of the home, and then the inside of the home, and the maintenance that goes along with it. And it can be anything from getting the furnace serviced, so hopefully it doesn't break in the wintertime, or the air conditioning in the summertime. It could be repainting, either on the outside or the inside, depending on the kind of home that you have purchased. And then there's the other cost, which sometimes you're used to because it was part of the cost when you were in that apartment. But electric, gas, water, TV, internet, all of those utility costs are now yours to pay. They're not part of the rent that was once paid to a landlord. They're your costs. On to the next slide. And then finally, and where all of the good stories come from, are the unexpected costs. Whether it's repairs, replacements, the problem with unexpected costs is they're not expected. You didn't think that something would break, like the air conditioner, which happened to us during that really hot spell in the spring, but it did. And that's the difficulty with unexpected costs, is how do you anticipate what might go wrong? Sometimes it's your house, like the time that after a heavy snowfall, the snow from our neighbor's roof crashed into our basement window and broke the window. Unfortunately, our insurance didn't cover it, and our neighbors were not nice enough to cover that repair, so we had to. Flip that story around, and sometimes the repair is to your neighbor's house. My sons were playing baseball in the backyard and hit a line drive into our neighbor's screen porch. We asked our children to go over and apologize, and we certainly paid for the repair of that screen. I'm sure that they had the insurance to cover it, but this is an example of sometimes you just want to be a good neighbor by covering the cost. So inside the house, there can be plumbing problems, there can be appliance problems, there can be all kinds of problems. And as well as outside, there can be roofing problems. I think Anne mentioned an example, windows, painting. The best you can do is plan for those unexpected costs as you think about your budget, and always have a little bit extra in a savings account. And with that, it's back to Anne.
All right. So what do you do first if you want to own a home? So the thing that I will say to you before I say anything is plan, plan, plan. The important thing with owning a home, which is probably the biggest purchase you will ever make, is to be absolutely sure that you are on track to make a good purchase, that you know what you want, you know how to get it, and you think you're in a position to be able to afford it, okay? There's nothing worse than thinking, oh, I would love to buy a home, and you don't plan, and then you find out you're really not in a good position to be able to do anything about that, okay? So do get yourselves in a good position. And so consider some of these things before you even start thinking about, you know, which home you can buy. Get yourself in a good position to be a good buyer. So first of all, you must consider all the costs involved. We've given you a little heads up on some of that. And look at your savings, okay? Look at your savings and your income. Say, do I have any savings to use as a down payment? And I don't think we particularly explained this, but a down payment is simply the money that you put down as a deposit on the house, okay? So in some programs, as we'll talk about next week, it can be a very small amount of money. With a very traditional mortgage, it can be quite a lot of money. So look at the costs involved and your savings and your income. Make a budget. Say to yourself, how much is my income each month? How much are my expenses each month? You know, if I took out the payment for things that I wouldn't have to pay, like rent, when I actually am paying a mortgage, how much can I afford each month? What's the difference between my income and my expenses? And just as a guide, all of your debt, so that's everything, that's your student loan, your car loan, money that you owe on your credit card, all of that, plus your new mortgage loan and any other monthly costs, all that debt should not exceed 36% or roughly a third of your monthly income, okay? So just be very careful that you don't go in the deep end and try and, you know, get out a mortgage or a loan for more than you can really afford, because most lenders are going to use this rule of thumb. So they're going to say to you, what is your income? What is your expenses? And they're going to say, ooh, you cannot borrow 50% of your income. You just can't. It's very important. A lot of lenders do require a reasonably good credit score. As we'll see next week, many of them require a credit score of more or less 620, sometimes as much as 680. Don't despair. There are programs that you can have a credit score as low as 500. But typically, a lot of the programs do require that you have a good credit score. So if yours is not good, start working straight away to try and make it better. Do make sure that you're a good candidate for a loan. Typically, lenders will say, we would like to see a steady work history. You know, we don't want to see that you change your job every month. We would like to see that you've been in a job, the same job or kind of job at least, for 2 or more years. They would like to see that you have good documentation for your earnings. They like to see that you have a bank account. They like to see that you're making all your payments on time, that you keep up with your bills, you know, that you are a good person for them to lend money to, because you are proven to be responsible already with money. Okay, so again, these things really help. You know, if you don't have a bank account yet, think about opening one. You know, make sure that all your bills are paid on time. Make sure that you don't have too much debt. If you have a lot of credit card debt, you really need to get that paid down before you think about, you know, adding to your debt by taking on a house. And oftentimes you can get pre-qualified for a loan. We will talk a little bit more about that next week too, but you know, you can often go to a bank and you can just find out, just talk to your bank and say, hey, you know, could I even afford a house? Like, you know, would it be possible for me to even take out a loan? Okay, so there will sometimes be a charge for actually making a mortgage application, but sometimes you can get information and find out if you even could get qualified to take out a loan at all based on these things that we're talking about here. All right, and then on the next slide, we'll see, how do I actually find a home to buy? Like, it's all very well getting myself all excited, but how do I find a home? What do I think about? So again, it's all about planning. Think first about what is important to you. Okay, the first really important thing is going to be what you can afford. Okay, so don't get carried away with what you would like. Think first about what you can actually afford. Then think about, where do I want to buy this house? Location is very important. So you might absolutely need to be near good transportation, whether it's bus, metro, a major highway. If maybe you have a long drive to work. Okay, so it's going to be very important that you're perhaps close to a major highway. Maybe, you really need to be close to shops. That's important to you. Maybe you have children. Schools are going to be very important to you. Maybe you would really like to be in a good school district. Maybe your children, you really want them to go to a parochial school. So again, look around and see what schools are there and see what kind of reputation they have. Then you're going to consider the size and the type of home. Do you really want an apartment? Would you rather have a single family home, or would you rather have a townhouse? Does it matter to you? Is it all a question of what you can afford? I know when we were first looking for a house, when we were first married, we really hoped that we could afford some kind of single family home, probably a townhome. But we also looked at apartments because we were very realistic about what we could actually afford. Some loan programs, again, this will be chapter 2 next week, will require you to buy a property in a certain area, or even from a list of homes that they will provide. For example, I will tell you straight away, if you want to live in Baltimore, for instance, you will probably have a lot more choice in a cheaper kind of price range than you might have in Montgomery County. Okay, because parts of Baltimore are not very good areas to live. So, just bear in mind, and again, more next week, that sometimes you will have to buy a property in a certain area if you want to get some of these really excellent loan programs. Again, next week, we'll talk about rent to own options. This is where you rent for a certain amount of time and you pay a little bit extra with a view to eventually buying that house. That can be a very good option too. And what you should do to maybe consider some more houses, like these days, everything's online. So you can go to, websites like realtor.com and just look and see what's available in your area. But eventually you'll probably want to choose some kind of local realtor in your area, in the area that you want to live in, and you'll talk to them. You can choose any one there are lots and lots of realtors. And I'm not recommending anybody, but you'll look for like the usual names, like, I don't know, Redfin, Wycott. There are lots and lots of them. And, when you're driving around, look at the signs that you see in people's yards, and you'll notice, who are like the most common kind of realtors in your area. And then you'll go to that particular realtor, and within that realtor company, they will find you an individual realtor, is a person who will work with you on finding the house that you want to find. And usually, just so you know, it's the realtor charges fees. But, we'll talk about that again a little bit more next week too. But, there's nothing to stop you starting to look at realtors. And again, a good way to do that is to get advice from your friends. Who did they use as their realtor? Or look at the signs, and see what realtors seem to be selling a lot of homes in your area. So finally, how you find a home to buy. Again, really important to see what you can afford. And just as a heads up, homes will cost more in areas that are much safer, that have really, really the best schools and facilities, like shopping and so on, if they're close to really good transportation. Also, if the homes are in very, very good repair or they're newer. So again, if you want a cheaper house, if you're able to do a little bit of, do it yourself fixing up, you can look for something that's not in such good repair. And certainly older homes are always going to be cheaper than really brand new homes. So, again, think about those things, what you would like, but also what you can afford, and whether you can do things like, do some repairs yourself. If you can't, it's going to be expensive to fix things. If you can, that might be a good way for you to go, is buy something that needs a few repairs. So having said that, does anybody want to tell me perhaps what might be important to them in finding a home? Like, are these things important to you? Are schools really important to you? Do you not mind where you are, just so long as, you are able to buy something? Is it maybe important to you to be close to family? That's also a consideration. Do you want to be able to have your elderly parents live with you? Is the size of home really important to you because you want to do that? Does anybody want to share what might be important to them?
The school is very important. My son's school is very important for me. A time to share or buy house is the first thing that I need to found a good school for my son near my house.
So that's an excellent point. And I think for many people who have school-age children, that's going to be one of the really important things, is like, you want a safe neighborhood and you want a nice neighborhood close to a good school. So that's going to be really important. And you're probably going to be less worried about, how old it is or that kind of thing, or even maybe the size. You're going to want it to be in a place where your children can grow up happily and have a nice education. So yeah, many people, this is really important. And again, that's where talking to a realtor is really good, because they can advise you which are better areas than others, which are better schools than others, and so on. Okay, so that's a point. Anyone else before we move on?
I would love to live by the beach or a lake. Oh.
A wonderful view.
Right. Yeah. So, you have to decide what's important to you. I mean, if you don't mind living near a highway, that's fine. That, maybe you just don't even mind. Me personally, I don't want to live near a highway, but it's just up to everybody. It's up to, what you want, but be very careful about what you buy. Make sure it is covering those things that are most important to you. All right. So let's go ahead. We will close up now. Bob will take us through the last couple of slides.
Okay, so just wrapping up, we've covered a lot of ground this morning around the question of, is home ownership right for me? We've talked about benefits, we've talked about disadvantages, and we've talked a lot about the different types of costs in the purchase of the house, but then after that, the costs going forward, the monthly maintenance and so forth to owning a home. And finally, a little bit about thinking about what that home might be for you, and how do you start that process of planning, and as Anne said, and planning. Next week, we'll get into a lot more detail about financing the home, talking about what a mortgage loan actually is, and then giving you some examples of the different types of programs that are available in this area anyway, to consider. And these are just going to be some examples. There's an enormous amount of information on the internet relative to home financing. We can only give you some of the more obvious and more significant examples, and hopefully that will be enough to get you thinking about what might work best for you.